The names Poe, Bierce, Hawthorne, Blackwood, blasphemy to their clean lips. From the Exiles by Ray Bradbury. And perhaps the names Pratchett and Gaiman can be added to that list, as an evangelical group has petitioned Netflix to have the Amazon Prime adaptation of their work, Good Omens, removed from its records and canceled. Now, it's no surprise that an evangelical group would make this move, and only slightly more of a surprise that they do so without doing proper research first. After all, evangelicals have famously censored, banned, and even burned the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. In fact, growing up in an evangelical home, I didn't have anything to do with the series until actually a year ago. And everyone has heard stories or known that sheltered Christian kid. I was a sheltered Christian kid. I grew up in a strict Christian household. I went to a Christian school from 2nd to 8th grade. And I've seen that such rules are arbitrary, and I understand, and while I understand a bit of the mindset behind it, since I have deconverted, I staunchly disagree with it. While I understand that people have given into quote-unquote satanic panic, and while it seems to have ended, it never did. Some people can say the satanic panic died in the 90s, but as we can see from the reaction to a comedic take on the Book of Revelations, such as Good Omens, it never went away. It never went away. It just kind of faded from the mainstream. I can list on my fingers what I was pretty much allowed to watch, and it boiled down to PBS, and that's about it. Evangelicals are certain sects of evangelicals are loath to have anything to do with anything that even has a hint of quote-unquote blasphemous or occult themes or overtones. And honestly, as I said, it's arbitrary. I've known people who weren't allowed to read the Chronicles of Narnia, even though it's one of the most blatant Christian allegories since Pilgrim's Progress. Heck, Lord of the Rings and other works of Tolkien were burned along with the books, along with the Harry Potter books in 2001. And even though Tolkien has famously stated that he despises allegory, there is a noticeable Christian influence on his writing because he was brought up Catholic. And he did bring some of that mindset into his writing. You can clearly see the influences if you take the time to critically engage with the piece. But certain evangelicals, certain fundamentalists do not Heck, they don't even take they don't try to critically engage with the book that they claim is the center of their worldview. They don't critically engage with their own Bibles. They either take what they, take what they read at face value, or they take what the pastors and other apologists have spoon-fed to them and just regurgitate those apologetics. Now, if they won't even critically engage with their own Bible, how would you expect them to try and critically engage with other literature, with other media? And especially with the more Pentecostal sections of the evangelical community, there is a belief that engaging in such media will allow demons into your life. That it's basically opening a Harry Potter book will be an open doorway to possession, or touching a Ouija board, or playing Pokemon, or what have you. In fact, shout out to Nervardia and Unholy Sarah. They did a pretty good collaboration on a Christian blog that went over, what demonic forces to avoid, and it was practically a checklist growing up. There were some things I was like, okay, what, statues of lizards? No, that's not an issue. But, most fantasy, because it has magic, and magic is witchcraft, and you can't have that. No. And but what makes it worse, or almost as bad as, in the research that I did coming up with this obviously unscripted video, as you can see, it's clear that for the most part, the evangelical community has moved on from, occult thematics to things that to books and media that deal with the LGBTQ, GRSM community, because that's the hot button issue now. And that, and I'll put the links for the data in the description. But even, no matter why you do it, censorship is censorship. And when you heavily censor, people, when you heavily censor people's access to media, especially as they're growing up, they will become heavily indoctrinated into whatever into whatever worldview you're trying to foist on them, because they have little to no access to other ideas. People most effectively communicate their ideas through media. People write books and put their ideas into the books. People write plays. They put their ideas into the plays. Shakespeare, which was, Shakespeare is a perfect example, as his plays are literally taught in English class to explore his themes and ideas and what he had to say about the world. About the human condition. And while it's more of a window into the, into the cultural psyche of the time, it's still what people think about people influences so much more. There's a quote, I forget who said it, but I'll put the name in the description as after I double check. But whoever murders kills a man. Whoever burns a book kills reason itself. And even beyond the damage it does by heavily indoctrinating the people who are under these limitations, under these restrictions, it makes the media made for that audience either go really, really bland or completely off the deep end, like off the Marianas Trench deep end. And that's a bit to go into, for this video, because this is more of an overview / perhaps call it a rant. But I will be going further in depth onto why, on to how insane Christian literature, specifically Christian YA literature, can get, especially, ones dealing, touching on science fiction and fantasy, because those are the ones that authors have to quote unquote be more careful about. I remember sitting at church before a church like youth group or perhaps some other event. I was reading a Dresden Files book. This little lady came up to me. It's like, I felt the Spirit talking to me and saying that you need to get rid of that because it has a demonic presence on it. Even though I was still heavily evangelical, heavily Pentecostal, I kind of waved it off because even then I was starting to, it's a fantasy novel. I know it's not real. But perhaps that may be a reason why they make these arbitrary lines. Because if we realize, if us good Christian kids read fantasy or science fiction novels, with the mindset that it's not real, perhaps we might turn to the Bible and with a more critical eye is like, this doesn't match up. If this is almost as fiction, this is as, just about as fictional as, the adventures of Bilbo and Thorin. But anyways, I'm wondering, and seems like I'm slotting myself into the niche of the atheist commentator on Christian culture. If you like the video, if you have any suggestions, for what I could do better, go ahead and leave a comment. And subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me as I go off as we take this journey together. And you have a good day.